Well, hello, everyone. This is Ian, and welcome to this short update. I'm preparing a series of short little videos that hopefully can be watched before our presentation tomorrow, or before a meeting tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. Not required, but I think it may help us as we move forward. I will refer to these slides tomorrow during our presentation or during our conversations. So I've prepared, I think, around 3 or 4. Those will cover things like what's the general direction that we're going with our work plan? What about graduation? What about access to finance? And what is this thing called phases? Because those are the major ones that I think we need to kind of have a general consensus on and to talk through. So there's a couple things. One is, as we look forward to FY21, we're going to have some themes we'll be considering. Adaptive management. That includes operation management and livelihood shock. So some examples of operation management are like remote working, changing operating parameters set by the government. We know the government could maybe reinstitute command posts, limiting group sizes because of COVID-19. And we continue to have some issues around the internet and telephone. And in terms of anticipating livelihood shocks, those are secondary impact of COVID-19, pests, maybe some communal conflict and violence, and then climate-related issues, especially related to drought as we go into this next year. Programmatically, we want to complete the basics. We're going to talk about this concept of graduation readiness and how we want to set that up. Continue to innovate on delivery of services, really focusing on some of our small businesses and IGA. Also, access to external finance will also be an important factor. But we also want to lay the foundation for LRO2 and thinking about how do we want to manage this year, this next 16 months actually, and how do we want to manage our resources. So the next slides kind of come from what USAID has told us were going to be their hot button issues. And you'll see that the work plan that has been submitted is, I jokingly call it, a love letter to USAID. It was written less as a log frame than to these particular issues. And there's around 6 of them. One, graduation of beneficiaries. We know there's a strong focus on number of households that were supposed to be graduated. Around 18,375 around there. Let's say 18,000 right now. But that's a lot less than we thought, than we have been able to graduate, and definitely a lot less than what the government has been able to graduate. So that's a big issue. Big level of anxiety about how are we going to show success if we haven't graduated households. Now we're going to go through each one of these in separate slides or even separate presentations, but I want to highlight loan guarantee fund. A primary way that USAID is evaluating this project is how are people accessing external finance. So there's a fear of us underutilizing that fund, afraid that we may not be able to even meet those recommendations, or not meet those recommendations, but make our targets. Another issue that was raised was addressing midterm evaluation recommendations. Just so you're aware, we won't go into great detail, but we did develop a separate sheet for midterm evaluation recommendations, and you're going to see those recommendations kind of dotted throughout the narrative. So we won't spend much time here, but this is where we did capture some of the changes, and we may need to go back and slightly tweak this based on what we finally agree upon with USAID. Incomplete activities. There are several activities that we weren't able to complete or made our targets, so we need to think about how are we going to either complete those or revise targets. And lastly, in the next couple months, we are going to be asked about our sustainability and exit plan. So how are we going to do that? And so that's something we'll move forward on. So, and then there's a pipeline. So the good news is that we've been told we received 100% of the funds. The bad news is that we've kind of been overexpended. We've been really ambitious in our spendings. Let's do COVID-19 transfers. Let's recruit more field staff. We know that these were choices that we made along the way, but it's time for us to really reevaluate the effectiveness of maybe some of these interventions, but also now a chance for us to say, well, with the remaining 16 months at this burn rate, how do we adjust it? Yeah. And then how are we going to use our cost share? We're going to be using our cost share not so much anymore about our innovation funds. Those are kind of a times past, but instead, how are we going to use it to offset any other financial shortfalls? So what will be our focus? Well, our focus for August 31st, which was changed to September 5th, we'll talk about that, but we did have a case of COVID-19 in the office. It required us to shift the dates. So we submitted on 5th. We wanted to really to get the DIP, the revised LOPs, targets, life of project targets, talk about how they changed, get some buy-ins, kind of internally develop what are some financial implications of different scenarios we would develop. We haven't really focused much on the operational expenses, but that's something we do need to talk about as we move forward. So, what are we monitoring as we develop the different scenarios? Well, we have to choose these key indicators, and some of the key indicators we looked at was how close, how are we going to be spending our unspent funds? So the remaining amount of funds we have for the next 10 months, how are we going to do on that? The next one we have is how close are we to reaching our graduation targets? And the third one is how are we spending against the unspent loan guarantee funds? So I'm going to shift over a little to an Excel document to take a look at. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, but this is a target parameter sheet. You're familiar with this. You've seen the top above. We've done lots of work on this before. It's nothing exceptional. There is a new section though below. And that's what we want to just do is make sure we understand. So actually the number I chose was 1,220 around there. I guess 240 is the number. So what we'll look at here, and I'm going to make this larger here, is we are currently still $156,000 over budget, even after we make the changes that we're proposing. We are going to be at target once we have a revised target of households to be graduated by using a graduation readiness concept. And we're still a little, we still have some money, we still have to make some adjustments, maybe around our loan guarantee fund. So this is kind of what I'm monitoring for is how close are we getting these to zero? So you always want to try to get to zero. If we get to zero, that's great. That means that we're right on target. So you can still tell that we're a bit off, especially in our financials. So what are some of the variables that we could adjust? Well, there are several key programmatic variables that we wanted to look at. So households that we want to graduate. What are some of the major costed activities? How do we want to do that? So community-based trainings, innovation funds, career fairs, apprenticeships, wage employment, PPE, also loan guarantee funds for underserved communities. This is kind of this is an intervention we've been doing, but with some new incentives, considering a livelihood transfers for some groups, and also phases. So how does that look like on our target parameter sheet? Well, it looks like this. These are some of the areas that we have some flexibility on making adjustments. I wouldn't worry too much about looking at the percentages as much as the numbers here. Looking at that. This is where we're going to talk about like how much can we maybe provide for people using access to finance. And this is an idea that we'll be talking about, which is phases. All right, so that's our major ones. There is a couple other things if we'll talk about, which is how do we have these targets? What do these kind of key ones coming from? Well, they come from below. So to give you an idea, what we have here is, if we wanted to graduate 14,770, well, depending on how many people we provide loans to, how many people get livelihood transfers, all those things will help us determine on how close we are to that target. So it's a little complicated, but we'll talk about that. So right now you can tell that we're actually slightly over that graduation number if we wanted to go for it. But there's all the things here we have here, which is, how much money do we have for the loan guarantee fund? So, right now, for total access to finance, you can tell that this is, what we're looking at, but then how are we going to be doing compared to that? So as you can see right now, I believe it was slightly underspent. Well, not slightly, we are underspent by 118,000 in the loan guarantee fund. So these are how these numbers all fit together. So we're going to reuse the sheet. Everything comes from the sheet, and especially these resells that we'll kind of look at. And then kind of lastly, we've looked at where we get in monitoring. There's 3 major questions that we need to ask ourselves and answer in the next day or so. How do we want to do with graduation? How do we want to manage access to external finance? And how do we want to talk about phases? So again, this is just a general overview of the annual work plan and how we kind of structured the different scenarios. I'll be sending you some videos, this video link along with other video links shortly. Thank you.